So basically, Cixi is telling him to make his older female cousin, first cousin, to be his empress. And this is where I'll show you a few pictures because thanks to technology, we can know why and why not did Guangxu pick the girl. So this is Guangxu when he was young. So quite cute, right? Yeah. And then this is him as an adult. I think it's like one of those days, like semi-picture slash. And then this is supposedly from the modern day movies of the Empress. So like, what would the other girls have looked like if she was the ugly one? You think, right? You think. And then this is the Empress's calligraphy. So very nice. But actually, this is how she actually looked like. And so that's why the emperor did not want to give her the Ru Yi, but he had no choice. So he gave the Ru Yi to Empress Long Yu. To Long Yu. And then, so there was because he didn't have an option. And so so as he gave this to the empress, and then the emperor was just so angry, so he left. And as he left, the Empress Dowager quickly gave the 50 taels of silver to the pretty girl so that she cannot be selected as the concubine. And so because if she was selected to be the concubine, then she would still pose a threat to her own niece. And then gave the 2 purse sacks to two other sisters. One of them is Jin Fei. Jin Fei is the older sister. Not probably on the heavier side of things. And this is actually a favorite dish. It's from Tian Fu Hao. You can still go to that restaurant in Beijing. It's pork knuckle. It's drenched with sauce. So it's called the sauce pork knuckle. So it probably explains the figure. And so that's Jin Fei. And then her younger sister. That was Jin Fei. And his younger sister, Zhen Fei. Zhen means like precious. So she's the prettiest of them all, and the emperor actually liked her the most. But the emperor, obviously, I think from a little bit from the many years of being by himself, he's kind of a little bit off. What he really liked about Zhen Fei was if she wore like Western male clothing or any male clothing. That's when the emperor liked her most. And the emperor did not get along with the empress, probably because he was forced to marry her, and which began to cause different kinds of problems between the emperor and the Empress Dowager, because he was much closer with Zhen than with Long Yu, the empress, and Guangxu is really kind of weird. Like he would bring a bunch of dogs, and they would poo and pee around the empress's quarters and then leave. Like that's what the emperor would do.
Is there any explanation for his love of cross-dressing?
I have no idea, but he loved Zhen to cross-dress. So he wouldn't dress up as a concubine.
Right. Just her.
Yeah, just her. So she loved the cross-dressing of the other person.
In Western men's clothing.
Yes, because Zhen Fei and Jin Fei actually were both. They lived in Guangdong. So when they lived in Guangzhou, they actually had a lot of exposure to Western culture because Guangzhou was the first city to be open to foreigners. And but then because of and Zhen Fei, she's very smart. And so in the beginning, actually, Cixi quite liked her because maybe she saw a lot of herself in her. And so recommended a calligraphy teacher to Zhen Fei. But then Zhen Fei started to do things which caused the relationship to collapse between Long Yu and the emperor. And one of them was Zhen Fei loved to watch the Beijing opera. And then I think she had pictures of the then George Clooney of Beijing opera at the time. And then so the empress was kind of telling people that, because that was a big no-no, right? Like you have pictures of other men in possession. And then there's one time that George Clooney guy was singing in front of the empress and Jin Fei and Zhen Fei and the emperor, and the empress would say something like, hey, be careful, if Zheng Fei becomes unfaithful. And Zheng Fei cried, and as Zheng Fei cried, the emperor wanted to hit the empress, and it wasn't for the eunuchs to stop him. He would have hit her. So that actually created a big divide between the emperor and Cixi. So and then also there's Zheng Fei started to play around with things, which is a big no-no in all of Chinese history, and that is she observed that the emperor did not have any of his own people. So she started to recommend different people. Like, for example, her own teacher, Wen Tingshi, who was a very, very famous scholar at the time, and her own cousin, Zhi Rui. So you started to have, as Wang was as the teacher, you started to have this, a bunch of people who were loyal to the emperor. Because maybe they did the analysis that, the emperor probably would outlive the Empress Dowager. And or because I think if you study a lot of Confucian texts, you have this moral obligation to be loyal to the emperor and the emperor himself. And so this is so far what's happening with.
How do you even qualify to be one of these girls? I mean, it's all unicorn.
You have to be in the banners. You have to be within the banner. So.
Because the selection, they come out and meet these last four, like this thin person, maybe not very pretty, a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to be like a cream of the crop that he.
Well, she is, because she is the niece of Empress Dowager. So that's why she was there, and that's why she had to be chosen, because that's the way for the Empress Dowager to maintain control.
But the total selection to start with, I mean, from the Manchurians and the Golgans and the
Yeah.
Hans, how many sort of candidates would it be?
I think population of around 2 million in total of all banner people, but the cream of the crop probably would not have entered the context, because they know that being in the empress home was probably not the best thing. So a lot of people actually got married off really very early on, so that they're not part of it. So as we talked about this, we go straight to the other side of the 100-day reform, and that is the two famous scholars who are involved with it. The one person is called Kang Youwei, the other person is called Liang Qichao. So I need to start drawing with names. Okay, so the positions you would and then Wang. So this is kind of like the emperor side of the people. This is kind of the Empress Dowager side of the people, and this would be the people that would really be going against Guangxu. But I'll write as you go down the list. You have Guangxu, you've got Wang Tonghe, you've got so that's his side. And then this is in Beijing, and this is the provincial. And within this, there's also I put Kang Youwei, Liang Qichao, who are two Cantonese people, by the way. So they're two Cantonese people, and this reform is also known as the Kang Liang reform, because they are the intellectual basis. They're not in the political system per se. So it's a little bit like for example, civil rights movement, like Martin Luther King was not in the political system, but he probably made the most noise. He probably did the most. He was most visible. The same way, these two guys were scholars, kind of like a Martin Luther King situation, but they're the most known. And so they're both Cantonese. Kang is actually from a low, like the academics. So they've taken exams and have gone past exams in the provincial level before in his family. So he took exams. In exams, there are three levels: your own city, then the province, then the national. So he went through the city exams very easily. At the provincial level, he didn't do so well. It took him 6 times to go through it, and then it didn't go through. The first 2 times he didn't do so well. So he rather than taking the exam, rather than taking the exam so this is China at the time. So Taiwan is not part of China anymore by then. So he's from Guangzhou. This is Beijing. This is China. Yeah. Because he took the exam too many times in Guangzhou and probably knew people in Guangzhou and it would be too embarrassing. So it kind of like you don't audition in LA anymore. You go to New York. It's a little bit like that. So he traveled to Beijing. As he traveled to Beijing, he went to Hong Kong. He went to Shanghai and he went to Tianjin, where a lot of the foreign people were living. And so he saw like, wow, actually, like how come the Western quarters are so much better managed than the Chinese quarters? So he started getting curious about the Western system and became quite interested. And so in 1888, he actually wrote to the emperor. And then obviously it never got to the emperor. Actually, it's interesting. The emperor could only read documents or letters from people of at least the 3rd rank in the provincial level and the 4th rank on the Beijing level. So at any point in time, only about 400 people could talk to the emperor. So you could understand why the quality of decisions were actually usually so low. And so, as he was not doing so well in the exams, he actually opened a school. It's called the Manwu Caotang, which is the academy of 10,000 trees. So trees are kind of like your academics, and one of his main subordinates called Liang Qichao. Liang Qichao, also a Cantonese person, and he was a genius. He passed the city level exam when he was 12, and then his provincial level at 16. So he actually passed more exams than Kang, but nonetheless became his student. And Kang was he had a very, very healthy self-image. Like he called himself, the term in Chinese basically means better than Confucius. And all his top 10 students has different superhero names. And so, for example, Liang Qichao, his name effectively means better than Zigong. Zigong would be one of the students of Confucius. So his name is better than Confucius, and his top 10 students' names are better than this student of Confucius, better than this student. So and he is a great teacher to teach him, and then because he had a problem with a difference in opinion with his teacher on like a Tang poem Han Yu, and so the guy said, I vowed never to teach him. So this is Kang Yao ways, and usually reformers tend to have that kind of personality, and so as we talk about him, he continued to teach, and then he continued to take the provincial level exams, and by the 6th time he finally passed. And in 1895, as the Sino-Japanese was drawing to a close, and Li Hongzhang was signing the peace treaty. The peace treaty, obviously, the terms were horrible. Taiwan had to be given to Japan, and China had to pay 230 million taels of silver, which came up to about 3 years of China's income at the time. Everybody were like, we cannot fight this, And so, just like Hong Kong today, Kang was a candidate for the national exams, which actually he passed in one go. This is interesting. Provincial level took him 6 times. The national level, he passed. But on the same year in 1895, he actually ran this huge student rally where 1,000 people and him signed this petition to tell the emperor that you cannot sign the peace treaty. We can move to Xi'an, where we're far from Japan, and we can have more army and fight the Japanese. And obviously, at that point in time, the emperor already signed Guangxi already signed the thing. And so he's furious. And as he was furious, he stayed in Beijing, and then he started he started a society, 强学会. And what's interesting is, again, the Sino-Japanese War was such a huge wake-up call for the Chinese intellectuals and everybody in China that they were like, China must change. China must change. China cannot, for the past 30-some years, all China had done was learning the Western, let's say, the machinery, the ships, the artillery and everything. But the problem is actually our system. There's something wrong with this imperial system, so we must change that. And so from then on, actually, there was this huge movement of creating societies, the concept of societies. So from 1895 to 1911, when the end of the Qing Dynasty, there were 160 odd societies. One of them would be like Xinzhonghui, which is the main revolutionary society that Sun Yat-sen eventually took over China, or overthrew the Qing government. And what's interesting about these societies is basically a cross between like a Harvard academic with like an Al Capone. All right, it would be like so within the same society, a bit like let's say the Revolutionary Society, there'll be a bunch of gangsters, but then the head, like Sun Yat-sen, would be a doctor. So it's very much they had a very similar goal of changing China. You might be using different methodologies. So he created the strongest of them all, Qiang Xuehui, because he wrote, along with his student Liang, a lot of articles on how China must change. China must change its imperial examination system. China must build a new, like German-like military. China must have a constitution. China must have a congress, so on and so forth. And so everybody loved reading Kang's articles. And everybody loved to read Liang's editorials. Liang actually wrote in the most popular newspaper at the time, with a circulation of a grand total of 17,000 in 70 cities. It is a population of 450 million, by the way, but the literacy was about 10%. So a circulation of 17,000, one of the highest in the nation at the time, because Liang was an amazing writer. It was like, you could see, like your tears will flow as you read his words. That's what he's good at. He talked about the constitutional reform, and Kang wrote about Peter the Great and the other reformers like Meiji, and then so this book actually went to Wang, and Wang actually then showed it to the emperor. The emperor thought it was very impressive, wanted to meet him. Now, after the Sino-Japanese War, so he Chen Qingwang died in 1891. Yi Xin came back, and when he came back, he took over. He took his old posts again, but obviously China was so broken at the time, and he forbade the emperor to see Kang away. And we'll get to that later, because a lot of people kind of ignore the timing of his death and the beginning of the 100-day reform. But he forbade, because because Kang, after taking the exams and becoming a national scholar, was given a rank in the infrastructure department, the building department, with a rank of 6. So 6 is not high enough to see the emperor. Only 4 and above can see the emperor in Beijing, 3 and above in the provincial. So he didn't go. He didn't let the emperor see him. So Wang went to see him, and Wang really liked what Kang had to say, and so actually funded him to create his own society, Qiang Xuehui, which is the society to understand the teachings of self-strengthening. Okay, and it was like back in those days, it was one of it's like a fad to be, if you were in the government system, to be donating money to this society, or if you were like an academic, or if you were a scholar, to join it. And then they would have talks every 10 days, a bit like this, on politics and how to change China. And so at the time, at the provincial level, who has given him money? Zhang Zhidong. He was the viceroy of Huguang, which is now Hubei and Hunan. And then Yuan Shikai was one of was the main official in Korea. Then after the Sino-Japanese War, he fled. He now runs a 7,000 people strong military using German artillery. He's actually eventually the guy who overthrew the Qing Dynasty and the Beijing level. So Yuan also gave money. Li Hongzhang also wanted to give money, but Li Hongzhang, his name was too bad by then. So because the Sino-Japanese War, he was so disgraced because he was the commander-in-chief and he was the guy who signed the treaty. In Chinese culture, it's actually very, very interesting. We have this term traitor, or hanjian, which means the cunning Han, as in the wrong kind of Han, as the wrong Chinese. And whoever signed the peace treaty would always be labeled as the hanjian. But in this case, it's actually quite interesting because he didn't personally, like he signed it, he was only a pen, right? But it's something in Chinese culture where if you're the guy who did it, then you are the traitor. So he wanted to give him money, but Kang wouldn't take it, which is actually, you could see the naivety of Kang because Li, at the end of the day, he was, from everything we've talked about before, he ran the whole modernization process. He was the main guy for Empress Dowager. He was the guy who built the first modern military, the first guy who built the first modern fleet, the first guy for the railroads, the shipping, and also in telegraph, right? It's all Li Hongzhang. And actually, the fall of him is the big problem because when he fell from Zhili, nobody is doing it. Because it's a very personal thing rather than a government thing. So he was disgraced. And then Kang, even though a lot of his reforms were around the building of the infrastructure, so Li would have been a great guy, but Kang would not have him because, the scholarly, academic kind of personality of not allowing someone who's disgraced. And also, very interesting, is at the time, there were a bunch of the sons of the, so you look at these people. You look at the provincial level. You have Zhang, you have Shen, you have I'll get into that later. Tan, and also and Shen, and then Zhang.